Good morning, Larry. It's nice to see you. It is August 6th, 2020, and I'm glad you're with us here today for the St. Louis Press Club's Hour in the Now series. So please introduce yourself and tell us what you do.
So my name is Larry Levin. I am the founder and I think president may be my title of STL Non Profit News. And my day job is as executive director of Ozark Land Trust, a nonprofit that protects land across the Ozark region. So
yeah. It's an interesting combination, Larry. Anyway, I'd love to get into, the other side of that, of you. I'm focused on the St. Louis not-for-profit news today.
Of course.
So, and thank you again for being with us. And when I invited you, I talked about in the context of COVID, in the context of the pandemic, and a young organization like St. Louis not-for-profit news. My goodness, at that time, almost 2 years, or was it already?
It was 2 years. It was 2 years in April.
2 years when. Okay, so the pandemic hits, and it's not quite 2 years, and therefore, a growing business as yours has been. Tell us about the, jumping from growing business and then the pandemic hit.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So we started Nonprofit News a couple of years ago, April, after about 6 months of due diligence to see if it was a needed resource in the community, because the last thing we wanted to do was to duplicate other resources. So I did a lot of informational interviews with thought leaders in the nonprofit community, everyone from Maxine Clark to Barry Rosenberg at the Brown School to many others. And the question was, is there a resource like this? Do you think there's either a need or a want for a resource like this? And what should it look like? And after getting all that information and surveys and thinking, we launched in April of 2018. And we launched with a website, and we quickly added social media, and we quickly added e-newsletters to the complex of things we were offering. And then ultimately we added live events as well. We were pretty clear we had no desire to be in print, no insult to print. And as you know, Jessica, I've run a print publication before, but with a new resource and what we were trying to accomplish, it just didn't feel like that was necessary. Consequently, the good news was, we could start it with relatively small resources. Being able to be online gave us the opportunity to do things, in a more economical way, especially if I wasn't trying to derive a salary immediately from the project. So we went on for about a year and a half until COVID hit. And I think we also probably ought to talk at some point, and I think you want to, about the impact of equity and race relations, and especially as it relates to St. Louis. But as far as COVID is concerned, this year has been particularly tough because the nonprofit community has been very self-focused for good reason. And by self, I don't mean not caring about their clients and their constituents, but I mean survival. How are we going to get through this? How are we going to cope? Where is the money going to come from? For, some nonprofits that happen to be more in the, what we'd call the essential services class, I think there's been, resources diverted in that direction, which is the right thing. For others who are in from an essential services perspective, maybe a little more secondary. And we can debate what essential means, but right now I'm talking about, food, clothing, shelter, the basics that people need to live and exist. For others, it's been tougher. The other thing is, with severe unemployment, nobody really knows where the economy is going to take us, so we don't know consequently where donations are going to take us. The charitable community as a whole, foundations, et cetera, have stepped up, and there's been a tremendous groundswell of giving. But again, we don't know how long that will last. Remember, this also comes on the heels of a 2017 tax law change, that increased the standard deduction, but as a result, charitable deductions, especially on the smaller to middle size, aren't a separate deduction for people anymore. So the question has been, how is the tax law going to affect charitable contributions? We haven't seen a huge negative, and in fact, in 2020 was expected to grow for charitable giving as a whole. But again, combination of the Tax Act and COVID, really raises some questions. Now, if there are so many people who don't have any income, then we're not just talking about the smaller and mid-sized charitable contributions. Now we're talking about, a much wider swath of charitable contributions that could be affected both by COVID, and people's pocketbooks. So it's been a challenging time for the community. Consequently, for me, there's a lot of focus when I can get people, to focus on what does this mean to you? What are you doing about COVID? How are you dealing with it? We've stepped up posting resources about COVID in many different ways in terms of how they affect nonprofits. So we've really, we have a weekly newsletter that looks at national nonprofit news, but on some of those we've focused exclusively, on COVID, because it relates to everything, not just financial resources, planning, management, administration, staff resources. Are you getting support from the Paycheck Protection Program? Are you not? What other emergency resources can you get? So another big one has been, how do organizations think about what they do after they get through this? How does this inform their planning, not only for this period of time, but for the future, given what they went through this time? So tremendous amount of thought and discussion in the nonprofit community. For me, more focus on that issue, of course, and then for me, trying to be respectful of people who maybe don't have the time to do interviews or other kinds of work right now because of what they're up to. So
talk a little bit about, this belt tightening, if there was any.
As it relates to us, sure.
Yes, please.
Sure. So when we started, we really thought we would focus on just a few funders to build up to the point where we could develop a platform that that could be more retail in nature in terms of reaching out to people who utilize the platform. That's gone a little more slowly for COVID and other reasons. But people have stepped up. We've had support from the beginning from groups like the Clark Fox Foundation, Family Foundation, from YouthBridge, the Community Foundation. They've been a nice supporter of ours. From Board Builders, which is the company owned by Carol Weissman, who's been involved in the startup of this organization. So that's been useful. And then we've done some trade to support us. So for instance, we did trade with the nonprofit customer relation database Bloomerang, so that we could have a donor database, and we could list them as a sponsor. So there's been both cash and trade that we've been able to employ. A more recent supporter has been the Nina Needleman Charitable Fund. And actually, we have a very exciting new aspect of our business that I'll talk about in a little while that Nina has funded, and we're just launching this week, which is very exciting. So I would say for the scale we're at, we haven't been too limited, but if we want to expand our scale and go to a broader kind of outreach and platform and advertise more significantly, then we'll need more resources, and that could be a challenge right now. So
right. So the online presence has been pretty robust. So kudos. And of course, people need the resources that you offer, the information. What is different about this group of not-for-profits, or is there a difference from the rest of the country?
Well, I think let's talk about environmental factors. I mean, I think, especially since, 2014, I think, what really launched the Black Lives Matter movement, with the death of Michael Brown, has had a tremendous impact on St. Louis, both from a tragic perspective and also for a call to action. And to some extent, you can say that the germination of the very strong efforts to protest inequity and racism, in the country, at least this more recent phase of it, originated with some of the work associated with the aftermath of Michael Brown. So I think for St. Louis, even though we are still pretty obviously, occupied by serious issues associated with structural racism, I think we've seen some really strong efforts, come into being here, such as Forward Through Ferguson and the Ferguson Commission Plan and the infusion of diversity and equity and inequality into so many different aspects of how we think about the nonprofit world, which is a really strong and positive element. We're even seeing, and this is still early, I will admit, but I think we're seeing it again. We're seeing it here, maybe because of the circumstances here, but we're seeing more intentionality from some of the foundations, in St. Louis about these issues, which is positive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, for instance, I'm thinking of all the ways that this might work out. So you have boards, so maybe the makeup of boards will change, leadership, volunteerism. There are a lot of aspects to that not-for-profit world. Might you want to speak on any of those? Communication, internal communication.
Right. And I'll jump over and talk about, my work with Ozark for a minute, because it's extremely relevant to this. That's in a sector, conservation, that has, for a long time, been accused of not being nearly as diverse in terms of staff and board, and not being focused enough on community conservation and those kinds of issues. So I'm seeing a call to action in that sector right now, about those very issues that you just raised. Is your board diverse? Is your staff diverse? How do you reach out to different constituents? How do you listen to different constituents? Really, listening being probably the most important thing of all, right? Listening and respect. So I'm seeing it over there. Here, yeah, I think we're seeing it. I described some of the ways. There's a national organization called Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, or EPIP, EPIP, and I actually did a podcast with them about a year ago. And what their goal is, and they have a St. Louis chapter, what their goal is to teach young, I shouldn't say young, newer voices in philanthropy about how to infuse diversity and equity and racial issues and inequities into philanthropy, with the thought that it will not be some separate other thing that has to be an attachment or an add-on, but it is simply thought about as one of the major factors that one thinks about in terms of what does one fund in the community? Where does one affect the biggest change in the community? How do you get the most bang for your buck? How do you create effective outcomes that transform community? So I do think there's a new generation of leaders in philanthropy that are pushing the envelope, and we're seeing that. It's interesting. I did one interview over the last 2 years where we were talking about how to map and understand the issues of inequity. And I asked the question about, you know, how are organizations seeing uh, structural racism and other related issues in their decisions about what to fund, what to work on, et cetera. And the response was interesting. It was kind of like what I just said to you. We don't see it as an appendage. We just see it as part of the landscape, part of the environment. And, you know, I think that's where we're going, both with foundations and with nonprofits as a whole. And I think, as I said, St. Louis does have somewhat of a special place, you know, because of, you know, all the challenges that we've experienced and the calls to action. I mean, look, you ask about the impact. We just saw it in the election, right? We just saw Corey Bush, you know, defeat Lacey Clay. That is a direct result of Ferguson. That may not be a nonprofit thing directly, but it is testament to how the impact on the community is affecting social change, and the nonprofits see that as well.
Right, absolutely. I loved your piece on the NIMBY versus YIMBY, not in my backyard, yes in my backyard, and you're speaking to that right now. Speak about it a little more, if you would, please.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, it was as I was thinking about kind of the intersection of COVID and racial issues and structural racism. I mean, much has been written about health disparities, right? And we have one of the leading experts in health disparities and outcomes, you know, in the country, if not the world, here in Jason Purnell. And you know, he writes eloquently and fiercely about it. And so that, you know, that's kind of a given. But one thing that hasn't been talked about a lot is, you know, the notion that as things get closer to home, you know, people react personally. And you know, I think it's interesting that these two major macro social issues are intersecting, because to some extent they both reflect that. You know, at the beginning it was easy to dismiss COVID. It's over there. It doesn't count. It's not mine. Oh, now my second cousin has it. Oh, now my niece has it. Oh, now my brother has it. You know, and the closer it comes to home, you know, I think the harder it is to hoax about it, the harder it is to pretend it away, conspiracy it away. You know, so it's sad that we have to get there, you know, rather than relying on science. But it's a reality. People react more strongly. And then, you know, translating that to racism, you know, what we're seeing is, you know, recently the president was engaging in scare tactics relative to suburbs, you know, and really, when you listen to the words, he's really talking about the suburbs circa like 1972. Let's take the community I live in. I live in a upper middle class community. I'm very privileged and lucky to do so. And my community comprises white Americans, Black Americans, Christian Americans, Jewish Americans, Muslim Americans, LGBTQ Americans. It's not 1972 suburbs anymore. Consequently, you know, and you not only have the parents in these communities, but you have the children in these communities, and the children in these communities are protesting, you know, on the streets. You know, some of the parents are protesting on the streets too, you know, and in these communities, you know, you have people whose friends, families, neighbors, communities are diverse. And so, you know, when people from diverse communities look at George Floyd, you know, they don't look at it like not in my backyard. They look at it as that could be my friend, that could be my brother, that could be my relative, that could be, you know, that could be my husband's brother, my wife's brother, my sister's husband. It's just not the same anymore. So we have these two very incredibly important things that we have to deal with, and both are affected by, yes, in my backyard. Yes, these things affect me personally, because I know that I could be involved, and I am involved at any given time. So it's not just something that can be hidden over there.
Yeah. I do want to bring up your background. You're an attorney, you've served on the school board, you started a school foundation, which was unusual at that time. You are a longtime volunteer. You have all this, and I get sleep. But I see you have been active in, in dispelling the myths, the myths that have been perpetuated for so long about community, about humanity. And I think, especially in this not-for-profit environment, that is a good thing. Anyway, I think we're frozen.
I hope it is, as you know, Jessica, because I'm pretty sure it's where we met. I was the publisher and CEO of the St. Louis Jewish Light for, the better part of a decade. And while I've always practiced respect and understanding and compassion, I think seeing the diversity within the Jewish community, and I know to some outside the community that may sound strange, but everyone ranging from the most observant Orthodox communities to those who consider themselves Jewish from an ethnic or a people perspective, but not from a religious perspective. Seeing maybe mostly a white Jewish community, but a community with African Americans who belong to it as well. Seeing how different constituent parts of the Jewish community, deal with social issues and strife. So it was really helpful being the publisher there, because even though people knew my views, because we expressed them in editorials and opinion pieces, they also knew that I very much wanted to listen and understand and show respect to viewpoints that were different than mine. So that helped a great deal, I think.
Trust is a huge issue, especially when you're running a publication, an online, or whatever type of publication. You have to gain the trust of your audience. And that seems to be a big issue right now for audiences all over. There's a trust issue. And so how do you build that? How do you build that, Larry?
I have a little bit of a luxury since I'm small. So, so I can probe about any diverse set of perspectives, I want to without anybody yelling or screaming at me. Now, I think it's fair to say that the large part of at least the non-religious nonprofit community, tends to be a little bit more on the progressive side. Especially when you're talking about social services and the arts and humanities and not exclusively by any stretch, but a little bit more. But for me, I want to hear from folks, across the spectrum. We've talked about, I've interviewed, folks who are involved in trying to build awareness in the religious sphere, and that can be awareness on issues where people might not always agree. It might take bravery and courage, because those in the community might be venturing forth beyond what was comfortable within their little subset of the religious community. So we certainly have seen that courage with people like Susan Talvey now, and and Randy Fleischer for many decades. So I'm a little biased. I'm a member of Central Reform Congregation, but it doesn't matter which community you're talking about. But I think taking them or others who do what they do in perspective, always listening and understanding and appreciating, other perspectives is critical, no matter what the fire in your own particular belly is. And I probe on that. I try to figure out where people might agree or disagree. The best podcasts for me, the best interviews are two-on-ones, where I can sit there with two different people, and get different perspectives back and forth. I think that builds trust, because I think it doesn't let people stay in their silo and their bubble. So.
And you've expanded the information landscape, which is so important on the local level, especially. Talk to me a little bit about, well, here it is. It's August 7th, 2020. The economy, well, jobs are
scarce.
Yes. what happens to volunteerism in these times? You know, people are worried about, they're staying in, of course. What do you see as the volunteer sphere now and in the future?
I think there's always been a spirit, a resounding spirit with respect to crisis, and one example that is totally unrelated to nonprofits, mostly unrelated to nonprofits, was the flood we experienced here more than 20 years ago, right? That there were people bailing to save homes, and
Yeah,
you
I
know
served.
yeah, right. So that kind of demonstrates the point. And Katrina is another perfect example. I mean, nonprofits may be the collector for resources to support that and the amplifier of the need, but I don't think the volunteer spirit wanes in those periods. If anything, I think it waxes. And so I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that in food pantries, and we're seeing that in home support, and we're seeing that in checking in on people. We have a whole generation of people in hospitals who can't get visitors. What does that mean for the families? We're seeing support for the families in new and different ways. So I think there's ingenuity, and there's energy, and there's spirit in volunteerism. And right now, this is kind of sad to say, but there are more volunteers because there are more people out of work, which is sad. Now, what does it mean for the future if and when the economy is more stable? I think it'll provide new kind of lessons on how to engage. Certainly, social media, which we touched on earlier, social media is a great way to engage, and we've seen entire help movements built around engaging through social. So, but how you do it, again, it's a relatively new technology. And we know that learning about technology always, lags behind the creation of that technology. So we're, as you know, because you're a media literacy teacher. So we think about, morals and ethics associated with technology. And we also think about how can technology help. And so, we've seen an outpouring in that regard. And I think we'll learn new ways too. So.
Yeah, I think this certainly has proven that emerging technologies have come to fruition for this particular time, perhaps maybe even faster than they might have if we hadn't dealt with all this, and they will continue. So getting to your bailiwick, what kind of technology do you use? You talked about it, but during COVID, was there anything new you used to get through?
No, I don't think so. We've used a hosting site called Bluehost, which is and we use the WordPress based web tool on there. We started with a very simplistic website that I built, which gives you an idea of how poor it was. And then when we had some resources, we engaged a local firm named Beanstalk Web Solutions to actually do a professionally designed website, which we've been pretty happy with. And that's been in place since last year. Then we use a social media tool called Zoho Social to manage all of our social streams. So right now we manage Twitter, and we manage Facebook and LinkedIn. And we have a small Instagram presence, but I think that's something we could build as we get a little bit more photo and video oriented. So I'm looking forward to that. We've used MailChimp, the software and app for our email blasts. That's been very effective. We just, because of the grant we received from Nina Nienelman's charitable fund, we just contracted with our first new paid person, Jennifer Kramer, formerly of the Sheldon and other places. And she is helping to rectify some of my gross deficiencies in marketing and social media. And she's just this week adding our third email blast a week on Wednesdays, our Wednesday news notes, which is actually a resuscitation of something we tried early on that was not working particularly well. But now with Jennifer's help, I think it's it's a critical resource. Because what we were doing is on Mondays, we were doing a mail blast about trends and stories in the nonprofit world around the country. And on Fridays, we were doing new content with Q&As or podcasts or other types of interviews or opinion columns like the YIMBY one you mentioned. But what we weren't doing was getting out the news weekly about what local nonprofits are doing through their press releases and their announcements and that kind of thing. Kind of what you see in the Business Journal for Business, but a relatively small percentage of what they do is in the nonprofit world. So we want to create something. Again, we tried it once, but we want to create something that makes the nonprofit organizations and people feel like they're being recognized and respected for the work they do week in and week out, and to give us more story ideas, quite frankly.
Of course, it's a symbiotic relationship, most definitely.
Can I say one other thing about that, Jessica? One of the reasons we started was because a huge percentage of nonprofits are small. We know that we hear about the WashUs and we hear about the Mercies, but we don't hear nearly as much about the tiny nonprofits. And one of the reasons that we wanted to start this site was to have a place for local St. Louis-based or chapters, but mostly St. Louis-based nonprofits to be able to tell their stories. And, I think we've done that pretty well through podcasts and through interviews. But I think this Wednesday News Notes really will add to that, because now, a nonprofit, even if they don't have a big PR and marketing department, if they've had a recent accomplishment, they can toss off a few paragraphs, send it to us. And I could see down the road us doing workshops to help the nonprofits kind of learn better how to do that work, so that they can be recognized in their everyday work. So,
yeah, a little glimpse into the future. Thank you. Well, Larry, congratulations. This has been a tough time for folks, highlighting the good work of the not-for-profits in our region, and they are so varied, as you mentioned. This, I think this bodes well for you. It bodes well for the community, and we at the St. Louis Press Club appreciate your time, your insight, and we appreciate it.
I want to thank you, and I want to thank you and the Press Club, because the Press Club does such great work, in highlighting the incredible importance of journalism and local journalism, in our community. And you've given yeoman efforts to that. So thank you and to them, and appreciate it greatly.
Have a good day, Larry. Thank you.
Here, Jessica, thank you so much. Bye-bye.